There is a told by a veteran of the U.S. Marines who participated in the battle at Khe Sanh in 1968. The U.S. Marines at that time seized the main base and an airfield in a surrounding valley by the hills. For weeks, only one sniper lying on that hill fired at the base, causing some casualties and restricting American troops. American soldiers had to launch many searches for artillery but still could not defeat the gunmen. Finally, the Americans had to launch an airstrike with a variety of aircraft and all kinds of bombs, from napalm bombs to 20mm cannons. All the American soldiers there had to go under the trench during the bombing raid in the hills. But as soon as the plane was withdrawn on the side of the hills, the fire was still burning. The smoke rose high up into the sky, as if nothing could survive. The sound of rifles resounded again. All the U.S. Marines in the base stood up and shouted in surprise, admiring their opponent. They thought that brave gunman was a remarkable challenge. It should be known that the U.S. Marines are the most elite fighters, selected from the infantry. This is clear proof that we can see the will, strength, and resilience of the Vietnamese army. That spirit permeates every person, and at Chu Chi is no exception. In 3 previous videos we know that in Chu Chi, American soldiers used many different methods, from smoke bombs, tear gas, pumping water into tunnels, tiller, bombing, and then waiting tanks. A type of gathering weapon was deployed in Chu Chi, but in the end, they had to go down to the basement to see how their cellar was, how it worked, and what was inside. Those soldiers are called the tunnel rat soldiers. Before talking about how the Vietnamese troops fight the tunnel rat soldiers, maybe we have to mention another very creative American style. That is using a strange variety of grass, which Chu Chi people call American grass. This grass is not an herb, it is a grass that keeps growing with rainwater. It grows very fast at the end of the rainy season. It is about 2 to 3 meters high, the body is very big and sharp. In the dry season, the grass becomes yellow and dry like straw, at which time they pour down napalm bombs so no one can live on it. Because the napalm bomb, when burned, it absorbs all the oxygen in the air. At the same time, it creates a large amount of CO that causes asphyxiation, so its damage is very large. After the bomb was burned, all of the hatches were clearly visible, unable to be disguised if we moved. We will leave footprints wherever we go, whatever we do will be revealed. For the US, finding this type of attack is like the invention of fire by humans, but for the Vietnamese soldiers, everything is very normal. It is extremely simple to walk so that it cannot reveal its footprint. The thing is whether it can do anything or not. It's what needs to be thought about. The Vietnamese soldiers always adhere to the slogan, go without sign, cook without smoke, speak without sound. At night, until the Americans were sleeping, the Viet Cong got out to attack. Wherever soldiers go always has someone else to remove their traces. That's why the Americans couldn't know what the Vietnamese troops were doing. The only thing is now the hatch doors are exposed. How do the Viet Cong fix it? When it comes to the soldiers fighting, the Vietnamese army has many disadvantages. These tunnel rat soldiers, when entering the tunnels, have 2 tasks. The first is to find documents of supplies, or anything of intelligence value. The second is to study the most effective way to hit the tunnels. The hatch at the Chu Chi tunnels is always designed very small, just how thin Vietnamese can get through. But the kind that eats hamburgers, pate all day, and drinks cocoa would never ever fit. They have come up with a very difficult problem. But that day, the US responded by sending a team of mercenaries of Thai or Korean origin to go underground. Back then, the Vietnamese troops used many types of traps to deal with the Americans, one of which was mine traps placed under the hatch cover. Discovering the tunnel door, the whole team of Americans were so happy as they discovered treasure and immediately headed to open the hatch. But they unexpectedly snatched the hatch cover and detonated the mine placed underneath the mine, killing all American soldiers. The old cellar door collapsed, the soil and sand buried together, so it lost all traces of the tunnel. Fighting a lot made the Americans wise. Later, the Americans knew the Viet Cong strategy, so they thought of a way to counter the bombs and hatches. No longer thinking much, American soldiers began to enter the tunnels well equipped. Each soldier carries a bunch of tools such as a phone, a M1911 pistol, a dagger, a flashlight, and a poison mask. Everyone thought it was good to be carefully equipped, but it really wasn't. Wearing a poison mask will get entangled. They can't hear the movement in the tunnel, it's still hot. The most misery of that day for American soldiers was that carrying guns into tunnels, carrying big guns could not go under the tunnels. Moreover, bringing that down was like bringing gifts to the Vietnamese soldiers. Bringing guns M1911 style greener was even more miserable because the tunnel was narrow. Each time they shot it, it buzzed loudly, one was completely deaf, and there was a man who was bleeding his brain. That is why the US has researched how to use some of the guns they have collected since World War II. Some of them are silenced to reduce the noise when fired into the tunnel. After overcoming those things, the American soldiers went into the basement to begin their adventurous adventure. That day in the cellar, the Viet Cong used all kinds of traps. The most popular and most known is probably still the bamboo trap. This type of damage was immense, although low lethality, but it struck the morale of the American soldiers. Just one guy got into the tunnels. After he collapsed into the tunnel, there was only a way to amputate his legs and pull it up. That day, the Vietnamese soldiers did not play the type of sharpened bamboo and then plugged it down like you still imagined. That was too normal. Bamboo is split slim as chives leaves, soaked in vinegar, soaked in urine mixed with shit for many days, so it's extremely toxic. That is why the trapped soldiers can only quickly call their teammates to help, but there are no other options. The teammates came to the rescue but saw that scene. Not a single guy could have the bravery to continue. The other soldiers were all very scared. The Vietnamese soldiers in Chu Chi also cut small holes to observe in the tunnel. When the US troops entered, they passed through the observation hole. They would slash their hip, they could not avoid any. Bamboo spears nailed them to the wall of the earth, there was no way to save them. The reason the Vietnamese have to play such dangerous moves, because life under the tunnels is too hard. Living on the land was already hungry and hard, but the Americans were hunting them down and snuggling in the basement. Damp, lack of air, no one could bear it. If they don't kill the US soldiers, the US will kill them and their loved ones as well. That is why, by all means, they must reduce the American will to fight. Living in the basement, most afraid is itchy, sores. The soil is moist, coupled with a lack of oxygen and darkness, so almost everyone suffers from skin diseases. That day they were most afraid of getting sick with shingles. The skin was hot as if it was on fire, then it blistered and ran watery. The wound was difficult to heal. Every time they touch it, it hurts extremely. Knowing that pain is like that, suffering like that, but everyone understands that. It is still nothing compared to letting the Americans catch and torture. It hurt more than 1,000 times. For that reason, the Viet Cong has to come up with lots of horrible things to destroy the Americans, but definitely cannot be arrested. This video is already long, so we will be continuous about the ultimate intellectual battles beneath the Chu Chi tunnels in the next episode on the 1st of September at 7 p.m. How do you think about this topic? Please let us know in the comment below. Like and share if you love it. Thank you and see you on the 1st of September at 7 p.m. In the previous episodes, we delved into the ways the US military employed in navigating the Chu Chi tunnels and how the Viet Cong countered the American tactics. The strategies of the US troops, like using Big Chi Germany to detect tunnels, pumping tear gas into the tunnels to force the Vietnamese soldiers out, flooding the Chu Chi tunnels with water from the Saigon River, using B-52 plane to bomb the tunnels, or US F-5 aircraft to drop bombs, all ended in gruesome failure. Even deploying a mighty force for sweeping operations or bombing in various ways proved futile. The US military even brought in massive bulldozers to clear the tunnels, using heavy tanks to crush the tunnels during Operation Cedar Falls. So why did Operation Cedar Falls still end in failure? How did the Viet Cong manage to thwart those colossal bulldozers and advanced tanks? Let's explore in this video now. In those days in Chu Chi, there was Mr. Tahoai Duc, a man whose knowledge only reached reading and writing, with some mechanical skills related to cars, but without any education in bomb making. Yet, he was the one who ingeniously crafted the Gat mines that trapped tanks, making the American military shed tears in their battles against the Vietnamese forces in Chu Chi. Initially, He borrowed 2 mines from the military officials, Russian mines, to study and then used them to test on US tanks. However, these mines required direct pressure to explode. Placing a bomb between the tank's wheels had no effect at all. This drove him to experiment further, leading him to extract explosive material from bullets and unexploded bombs to create these mines. He added a firing mechanism, leaving a small hole for a long stick. When a tank rolled over the stick, it triggered a powerful explosion without needing direct pressure. According to statistics, due to Mr. Chi Duc's innovation, nearly 5,000 American tanks were destroyed in Chi. Most were taken down by his handmade mines. This astonishing feat drew numerous foreign journalists after the war to interview Mr. Duc out of sheer curiosity and unbelievable. For them, a highly educated person with ample credentials couldn't achieve what he did. So, how could a rural youth with basic literacy outwit and improve combat weaponry so effectively? An Australian war correspondent named Burchett, who was stationed in Vietnam, sought an interview with Mr. Duc. He asked, "Given the unknown danger, how could you take such risks?" Mr. Duc replied that soldiers on the battlefield face death whether from a tiny bullet or a big bomb. The value of death is the same, size doesn't matter in this case. Hearing Mr. Duc's response, Burchett, the journalist, was deeply surprised, nodding in admiration. To the Vietnamese, figures like Mr. Duc were not hard to comprehend. But for Americans and Westerns, it was unfathomable. Vietnamese people had limited access to modern weapons due to lack of education and resources. Just looking still has no chance, let alone inventing ways to combat sophisticated weaponry. According to former Vietnamese Prime Minister Vo Van Kiet, a high-ranking leader in the Chu Chi battlefield, the Vietnamese soldiers saw American M113 armored vehicles swimming across the river, a sight as strange as encountering an alien species. At first, they heard distant rumblings that echoed like thunder beneath the ground. Then, unfamiliar vehicles appeared, moving in a line. The Vietnamese soldiers didn't recognize these vehicles. They gathered by the river, pointing, and discussing, trying to figure out what kind of vehicles these were. Initially, they thought the tanks on the opposite bank couldn't cross the river, so they stood at the riverside, joking for fun. However, the tanks plunged into the river, crossing to their side. The Vietnamese soldiers were stunned and rushed back into the tunnels to hide. Later, they learned that those were M113 armored vehicles, capable of both swimming and shooting. Initially, the Vietnamese forces were wary of these armored vehicles as they were versatile and unpredictable. Able to cross water, move on land, and fire weapons and even transported soldiers. But after devising the Gat mine strategy, the Vietnamese military started to wish for these vehicles to come to Chu Chi in abundance for economic gain. The overseas Chinese community knows that the Viet Cong has successfully beaten M113, flocked to Chu Chi to order parts and materials in bulk, like scrap metal collectors do today. Components, machinery, even aluminum casings, each piece could be sold for about $100 to $150 in 1967. This influx of funds enabled them to buy rice, salt, and medicine, supporting a company of about 100 soldiers for a whole week. As the supplies almost dwindled, the Vietnamese soldiers would sit by the river, eagerly awaiting the armored vehicles because if this kind of vehicle came they had scrap to sell making money. If not, they had nothing to eat. Although the US Army failed in tricks with the most advanced techniques, it lost a lot of money. However, the purpose of the US was still to clean up the Vietnamese guerrilla army in the Chu Chi tunnels. So the US military did not want to stop at this defeat. So how did the US military change its tactics? What weapons or fighting methods can be used to clear the guerrilla army hiding in the tunnels? And how the Vietnamese army against the US Army? Let's find out in the next episode.
How do you think about this topic? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and share this video. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our videos and much more. Click on the screen to watch another thrilling video. Thank you for joining us. See you in the next one. Take care.